Hey, this is Pastor Bunjee Garrett, and I want to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement. Well, I'm sure we've all seen videos by now that reveal the catastrophic damage that's been caused by Hurricane Ian. You might not know this, but this is actually one of the strongest hurricanes to ever hit the United States of America. And my heart goes out to all the Floridians who have lost their homes or maybe lost a loved one. And then there are those, at least 2 million people who are now without power. After making landfall early this morning, Ian turned into a tropical storm, and yet the National Hurricane Center is expecting this storm to regain near hurricane strength after emerging over the Atlantic in just a few hours. And, it's possible that this storm could then make landfall once again as it continues to move up the East Coast. With that being the case, we should be praying, and we should pray for those who have already been impacted by this storm. And not only that, but we should also pray for those who are still in the path of this storm. And let's pray that the Lord will use this tragedy as a way of revealing his power to those who are even currently crying out to him. At the same time, I also encourage you to realize that, the climate change priests on the progressive left, they're already assuring us that their climate change policies can actually protect us from future hurricanes. For example, it was just this past Tuesday when Senator Amy Klobuchar, she assured her audience that the only way for us to stop these sorts of storms is by voting Democrat. Here's how she put it on MSNBC's Morning Joe, and I quote, "That's why we've got to win this as that hurricane bears down on Florida. We've got to win in the midterms. We understand that." Yeah, that's right. The only way for us to stop hurricane season from happening again is by appeasing Mother Earth. And the only way for us to appease Mother Earth is by voting Democrat. It makes perfect sense, right? Well, not only does Amy Klobuchar want us to vote Democrat to stop, hurricanes from happening, but Don Lemon, who was recently demoted, also got in on this action as he spent time yesterday interviewing the acting director of NOAA, which stands for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It was during that interview yesterday when Lemon continued linking this hurricane to climate change. And in response, the director of NOAA declared, and I quote him, "I don't think you can link climate change to any one event. On the whole, on the cumulative, climate change may be making storms worse, but to link it to any one event, I would caution against that." That's right. According to this National Weather Service expert who, possesses 20 plus years of experience studying hurricanes, people like Don Lemon and Amy Klobuchar should stop creating these links between climate change and the hurricanes that impact the Gulf Coast every single year. Well, rather than allowing the expert to shush him, Don Lemon immediately appealed to his anecdotal evidence by declaring this, and I quote, "Listen, I grew up there and these storms are intensifying. Something is causing them to intensify. So this storm is it's a massive one." That's right. Never mind the advice of the expert who just cautioned him against linking climate change with Hurricane Ian. Don Lemon knows better than him. Don Lemon knows better than the experts because he has a story to tell about his personal life experience. And listen, even if Don Lemon was able to prove that climate change actually causes hurricanes like Ian, well, this still doesn't prove that climate change is caused by humans and then can be undone with progressive policies. As a matter of fact, there's no evidence that mankind is contributing to climate change at all. Oh, don't take my word for it. No, instead, I direct your attention to the words of Patrick Moore, who's actually the co-founder of Greenpeace. Moore recently informed members of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee that there is absolutely no scientific proof that humans are to blame for climate change. And here's how he put it, I quote him, "There is no scientific proof that human emissions of carbon dioxide are the dominant cause of the minor warming of the Earth's atmosphere over the past 100 years. That's right. There is no scientific evidence which would lead us to think that humans are to blame for climate change. Further proof of my point can be found in a UN report which was recently released. According to the data found in this 2,200-page technical report, global surface temperatures have not increased for the past 15 years. Get that for a moment. Global surface temperatures have not increased for the past 15 years. And with that being the case, all of the climate change policies that progressive politicians are pushing for, they won't change the fact that hurricane season, it happens every year. At the same time, I do think that there is an interesting connection between the catastrophic storms that happen here in North America, every time our leaders try to divide the land of Israel. Case in point, it was just last week, September the 21st, that's when Biden delivered a speech before the UN General Assembly, and it was during that speech when he called for the creation of a Palestinian state by declaring this, and I quote, "The United States is committed to Israel's security, full stop, and a negotiated two-state solution remains our best way to ensure Israel's security and prosperity for the future and give the Palestinians the state to which they are entitled." That's right. Biden just assured the United Nations that the U.S. is committed to dividing the land of promise into a two-state solution, and exactly 1 week later, Hurricane Ian made landfall there in southern Florida. Now, I get it, you might be quick to dismiss this as less than a coincidence, and if that's the case, then I'd like to consider a few more examples which have been compiled by Michael Snyder. It was actually back in May 19th, 2011, that's when President Barack Obama told Israel that there must be a return to the pre-1967 borders. And then 3 days after this, it was on May 22nd when a half-mile wide EF5 multiple vortex tornado ripped through Joplin, Missouri, which ended up becoming the costliest single tornado in U.S. history. Again, maybe a coincidence, but it is interesting timing. Before that, if we back up to 2005, we find President George W. Bush convincing the state of Israel to remove all of the Jewish settlers out of Gaza and then turn this land over entirely to the Palestinians. And as the last Jewish settler was evacuated on August 23rd, 2005, it was on the same day when Katrina started forming over the Bahamas. And as we all know, Katrina became one of the costliest natural disasters in all of U.S. history. 2 years before that, on April 30th, 2003, that's when U.S. Ambassador Daniel Kurtzer, he presented Israel's prime minister with the roadmap to peace. That's what they called it. And then over the course of the next 7 days, the U.S. was hit by a staggering 412 tornadoes. It was actually the largest tornado cluster that's ever been recorded here in the U.S. And if we back up another 4 years, it was back in May 3rd of 1999 when a Palestinian leader, Yasser Arafat, he was prepared to hold a press conference in order to declare his desire to create a Palestinian state with Jerusalem as their capital. And on the same very day, the most powerful tornadoes ever recorded in U.S. ripped through Oklahoma and Kansas. It was also the year before, on September 28th, 1998. That's when the Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, she was working on finalizing a plan which would require Israel to give up 13% of Judea and Samaria to the PLO, which is the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And on that precise day, Hurricane George slammed into the Gulf Coast with wind gusts of up to 175 miles an hour. Earlier that same year, on January 21st, 1998, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he arrived at the White House only to discover that President Clinton and Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, they both refused to have lunch with him, and it was on that same exact day when the Monica Lewinsky scandal broke. 4 years earlier, on January 16th, 1994, President Clinton met with President Assad of Syria in order to discuss the possibility of Israel giving up the Golan Heights. And within 24 hours, the devastating Northridge earthquake hit Southern California, and to date, that was actually the second worst natural disaster to ever occur here in the U.S. It was also 3 years earlier, October 30th, 1991, that's when President George H.W. Bush opened the Madrid Peace Conference, which brought Israelis and Palestinians together to negotiate for peace for the very first time. And just to be clear, the Madrid Peace Conference was really just an attempt to convince Israel that they needed to abandon all of their expansionist policies. And as President Bush told Israel that, territorial compromise was essential for peace, there was then a perfect storm brewing in the North Atlantic, which then traveled 1,000 miles in the wrong direction, only to then bring 35-foot waves to Bush's home in Kennebunkport, I think it's called, Maine, which is just incredible. It's just incredible coincidence, right? Well, after failing to receive this message, President Bush then moved forward with the Madrid Peace Conference in Washington, D.C. on August 23rd, 1992. And on the very next day, Hurricane Andrew made landfall in Florida, causing $30 billion in damage. And it was actually the worst natural disaster in the U.S. up until that point in time. Let's not forget about the Egypt-Israel peace treaty, which was signed in Washington on March 26th, 1979. This treaty actually required the state of Israel to give up tremendous amounts of its territory. And 2 days after the treaty was signed, there was a partial meltdown at Pennsylvania's 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant. Now, listen, as we consider all of these coincidences, I can't help but to wonder, is there more to it than just a coincidence? And with that, I would remind you of the promise that the Lord made to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. It's there where he declares to Abraham, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. You know, according to the Lord, those who bless the nation of Israel, they're going to be blessed. But those who curse the nation of Israel, they end up being cursed. And just to be clear about this, I'll remind you about the warning that the Lord presented in Joel chapter 3. There he promises to judge and punish those nations who have scattered Israel into the world and who have also divided up his land. Yeah, those who try to divide up the land of promise will be punished. Please trust me when I tell you that we don't need to concern ourselves with climate change or an angry Mother Earth. No, instead, we have to be seeking the forgiveness of the God who is clearly angry with any leader who tries to divide up the land of promise. With that being the case, I encourage every Christian, let's vote for politicians who have a biblical point of view regarding Israel. Not only that, but let's encourage every unbeliever to realize that the only hope that any of us have, well, it's found at the foot of the cross, where Jesus Christ forgives those who trust in him. With this as our message, let's continue, Christian, to fight the good fight of faith, and all for the glory of God.